On this episode, we are talking about Judas and the Black Messiah. We're going to be talking about breaking misconceptions about who the Black Panther Party was, further film and book recommendations for you guys, and begging the question about how we are responding to social injustice in our modern age. I'm Captain Nostalgia, and this is the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. Grab some popcorn, fight the power, because right now, spoilers are in. A spoiler warning is in effect. The show starts right now. We've tried many times to record this episode, and the elements have been against us. This is one of my most anticipated movies of this year. It was in my top 5, and I'm beyond excited to talk about this movie, Celeste. We're talking about, as the title suggests, we're all talking about Judas and the Black Messiah, and really, I think we're gonna jump into some history of the Black Panther Party and fred-hampton as a whole.
Yes, this film was also on my must-watch list when I first saw the trailer last year, and it delivered, thankfully. I love that we are getting more films like this into the Hollywood consciousness. Well, not just Hollywood as the industry, but, the general audience, because it's often we see the same films on the same black figures. I mean, we see many films where there's MLK, there's Malcolm X, and just a couple years ago we had a film with Harriet Tubman, or something to do with a hero that we got during slavery, and there's even the project involving Barack Obama that's going to be made into a film. So it's great that we are getting these films where we're seeing these black heroes that are not really taught in schools and are kind of left out when we talk about great African American figures, because not many people know about them because the information is usually not put across in the mainstream. And if there's one great thing I can say about Judas and the Black Messiah, is that it paints a portrait of a young revolutionary, but mostly focusing on the impact he had around the people that were inspired by him, and not just showing just him going from birth, doing this and doing that. It's about a guy who inspired hope and change, and then was cut down way before his prime.
I'm so glad that you threw in the term young to describe Fred-Hampton, because I didn't realize that he was only 21 when he had died until the end of this movie, which makes his story that much more tragic. And to your point about the Black Panthers, I really like the way that this film showcases and context this, because we were talking after we recorded Malcolm and Marie last week, where I had shared like my anticipation for this movie, and I wanted to know more about the Black Panther Party, because to me and to a lot of people, and I think they even address it at some point in this movie, Black Panthers are, this extremist group. Some people, like I've heard people coin the term vigilantes around to describe them, but they're kind of like looked at as like this extremist organization. In fact, that's how this movie opens up. Like Edgar Hoover's giving this meeting at the FBI, and he's talking about the Black Panther Party and how they're a terror to society, and he mentions, like they're higher on the list than like foreign countries were at this time. And I think for a lot of people, that's the conception that we have shaped and molded around the Black Panther Party and politics and beliefs. And I'm so glad that coming into this movie, I did all the research I did with shout out to Josh Bloom's brilliant book, Black Against Empire, the history and politics of the Black Panther Party, because it really broke down a lot of what Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, when they founded the Black Panther Party, really what they envisioned and really what they were feeling, both in a political environment and a societal environment as well. And that's one of the things that this film captures really well, is you're not just seeing who Fred Hampton was and how the FBI placed a rat or a mole in his organization, and how a lot of that was his undoing, but you're getting to see that really how closely tied his history is with the party and kind of who the party is. And that's something that I think this film does really well, and that's why I've been telling people that this is the first important film we've seen in 2021 that's really breaking stereotypes and really teaching the true story of who this party was.
Yeah, it's really hard for me over the years seeing, certain right conservative media or people who are just out of the loop when it comes to history treat the Black Panthers like they're the KKK. I hear often that the Black Panthers still get compared to groups like the KKK or even the Nazis, but there's never been a recorded case of the Black Panthers killing anybody like we have seen what the KKK has done. You hear stories about how the Black Panthers, like their male members used to rape their female members. Never been any story, any vetted investigative report into that, or no proof of it. You often hear that the Black Panthers were all about just killing white people, and they were all about for white genocide, and and rushing into cities and with guns and everything. But you see in the film that the Black Panthers were all about educating Black children on their heritage, on their real history. They were all about feeding kids. They had breakfast programs to feed needy children who weren't able to afford breakfast or lunch at schools. They offered tutoring for kids. They were all about building up their communities. They wanted to make their communities look good. They were all about creating medical centers, new businesses, educating people around them about their rights, the Constitution. I mean, they honestly were a miracle organization. And I'm not going to say that they didn't have faults, because of course every revolutionary group we have seen, there have been faults, but there has been a lot of misconceptions and myths and just downright lies about who the Black Panther was. And if anybody really wants to know what the Black Panthers were about, I wouldn't just say watch this film. I would say do like what you did. Go out, read books, listen to some podcasts, really go deep into the real history, and don't listen to what the mainstream media tells you about them, because the mainstream media has always figured out the Black Panthers to be a scary, villainous group just because Black Americans were all about protecting their own communities. They were all about using their rights to bear arms. The same Second Amendment that all these people who go crazy for whenever there's a mass shooting saying, oh, you're not going to take my guns away. Well, the Black Panthers were operating that same right too. But then eventually California made a law that was set on taking away the freedom to bear arms in public because the Black Panthers were doing it. So if anybody wants to get anything out of this film, is that this film does not adhere to any of those myths, and it doesn't adhere to a white bread, version of who the Black Panthers were. This film goes in depth with all that they did and all they were trying to do and their message. And even how Fred Hampton, what he should believe that the United States would be a socialist society instead of capitalism, because he talks about how capitalism is pretty much having everybody down bad, not just Black people, but people from all kinds of races. The people who live in poverty or in poor, they have one common enemy, and that's the people who make it their business to keep them down there in order to enlarge their pockets. So, this film is just very deep, and I can't wait to get into more of what it talks about.
We talked about redlining a little bit last year, and redlining, I think, gets associated a lot with the black communities, and we talked about it last year, and there's reasons and there are histories behind that, and we'll provide links to those episodes in the show notes. But if you guys aren't readers, before we go any further, Celeste, you had suggested 2 documentaries that people can check out on the history of the Black Panthers that kind of really go a little bit more in depth with here. If you guys want to know a little bit more about the history of the real life Fred Hampton and kind of want to see a documentary on that, 1971's The Murder of Fred Hampton is currently streaming right now for free on YouTube. Little bit sound issues, but Celeste, hit us with those 2 recommendations.
Oh yes, there is one documentary that's called the Black-Power-Mixtape. I'm trying to see if it's on any streaming services at the moment, because I remember I had saw it and it was on Netflix, but I'm not seeing that it's on a streaming service. But that's a good option for anybody to go and watch. And then also, I think there's another one called Vanguard. I'm having a hard time figuring out the name for it. I think Black Panther Vanguard. Yep. Vanguard of the Revolution. Yes, that is another good one as well. And they are both great documentaries. I mean, documentaries, the best thing about them is that they teach you about certain things that you didn't know about. And these documentaries, along with Judas and the Black Messiah, would be a great companion piece to check out. Just give yourself one day to soak in all of this knowledge.
One of the things that Josh Bloom talks about in his book is like, it's a very, very long introduction, but one of the things that he talks about is the majority of the Black Panther activity that took place was primarily in the late 60s, early 70s, and the party, as this film goes on to talk about at the end of it, does establish that the Black Panther Party has continued. It's just morphed, and it's not the same that it looked back in the 60s and 70s. But he talked about how the history had been mostly like scattered, and he really had to like look, and it was like very much like trying to assemble a puzzle because of just how disorganized the complete narrative of the history was. And part of that, I think, also comes from the white bread narrative that we were just talking about, but also I think it comes down from about how massive this organization really ended up being at one point. I think it had over 50 chapters across the United States. It started in Oakland, California, and but we were talking about this before we started talking, and one of the things that you had talked about when we did the Black Lives Matter series last year was about how we have this kind of like, when it comes to Black History Month, we have this very, very almost kind of like safe approach to history. We talk about slavery, but it's very like it's like very minimalistic. It's very PG. We talk about history, people of the civil rights, heroes of the civil rights movement with, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Jackie Robertson, and just some of these other heroes that we've talked about. But a lot of the times you're missing out on true revolutionaries. And Celeste, I want to know, why do you think that is?
Well, there's a reason for this, my brother. As I always tell you, there's a reason for everything that happens, especially when it involves how this country, America, chooses to celebrate Black History Month. Well, you always hear, I'm pretty sure we all heard as a young kid, what MLK did. That MLK was a guy who organized a bus boycott. He marched a lot. He had a lot of great speeches, and he stopped white people and black people from fighting and killing each other, and he saved the country from racism. But what they won't tell you about MLK is that the last 3 years of his life, MLK became more staunch in his beliefs, and not just about when it comes to white and black relations, but about the war. He was anti-war. He was never in support of us going to Vietnam. He was also about starting a movement for the poor in this country. He had started a poor march in Memphis, Tennessee, the city where he was assassinated in 1968. He was all about not just fighting for equal rights for black people, but fighting for the rights of anybody who is kept in the 99% and is living on the fringes of mainstream economic society. He became more of a guy that stood against what the politics and the temperature of America was at that time. It could be uncomfortable. So what they will teach you in school about MLK is kind of like almost a toned down version of what MLK was. It's simplifying him only to the things that speak to, America has moved on from being this horrible country. But they won't tell you about his later years in life when he had a lot of beliefs that really tie in with socialism. And you know how in America, everybody treats socialism like it's an evil boogeyman. The same thing happens when, we talk about people like Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, he's now celebrated as the greatest of all time, a world champion boxer. And, he won fights and he had a lot of knockouts and he loved the trash talk and he had a way with words. But what they won't teach you about is that Muhammad Ali was against the Vietnam War. And he was so against it that he actually turned down going to war when he was drafted. He wouldn't agree to go across to another country that had never did anything to him. And why he even said, why would I fight for a country that doesn't even treat my kind well? We need to be fighting a war here, which is a war to where we can defeat racism. But they don't teach you about that in school. They only teach you about his fights and, his float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, but they don't teach you about the Vietnam War. This is the reason why you don't hear about the Black Panthers in American history classes. It's because the Black Panthers were mostly against what America stood for during this time, which was racism, which was discrimination, which was, violence against a group of people, not just blacks, but also Native Americans, Mexicans, Jews, and any other ethnicity that is not considered a part of the Caucasian race. They were against all that. They were for black empowerment. They were for, being about your rights and teaching you things that, schools and even the government won't tell you about this country. And that's not a safe pick to be put into schools and allow kids to read that, because we in America, we grow up believing that America is the greatest country in the world. We believe in holding that patriotism and, putting it right on our hearts and putting our hands to our hearts and saying the national anthem. We believe in that. We believe in America. But when you get down to the nitty gritty of the figures, these historical figures that we have and the way that they were against some of the ways that America's federal government operated, well, then that ends up becoming a problem for the kid who's taught that America is the greatest country in the world, and it goes against what America wants you to believe about itself. So there's a lot of history that gets whitewashed. And it's really sad to see that the many attempts that have been made for different people to be taught in these schools, for curriculums to be changed, there's always blowback against this, and there's always blowback saying that we shouldn't talk about that history because it was horrible history and it doesn't make us look good. And yes, that's the point, because if you do not know your history, you will repeat history. And what are we seeing now? We're seeing the same things that MLK and the Black Panthers fought against. We're still seeing the same things that's happening right now. And people are wondering why it's still happening, because we still have people who believe that racism is not a thing because they were never taught about figures like the Black Panthers in their school textbooks. They weren't taught about what MLK was doing in the last 3 years of their life. They're not taught about Malcolm X. They're not taught about Marcus Garvey. They're not talked about these other revolutionary figures that were fighting against what America was built on.
Yeah, I always kind of equate it to, at least since I've been doing this podcast, is I've friends that'll ask me all the time, like, why I don't ever do drugs or why I ever don't drink heavily. And a large portion of that is because way back when, if I had problems, I was using alcohol as a means to escape it. But once you come off that high, that problem is still there. Like, I still have to deal with it. And largely, when you kind of ignore history, it's the same exact way, to where you are saying, oh, well, we'll just make this look a little bit shinier and a little bit more hopeful, in hopes that no one will notice. Well, you live in the age of the internet now. It's a little bit harder to do that, and we need to kind of unlearn a lot of the things that we've been taught, because it's at this point now where it's still, yes, to a degree, it's still a political issue, but it's a human rights, a basic everyday human rights of humanity that are being talked about. It's history that's being wiped out because we feel, quote unquote, uncomfortable. It's like, well, and to quote Batman, people need dramatic examples to shake them out of their apathy. And that's why I'm so thankful for movies like Judas and the Black Messiah, because yes, it is a very engaging film that Shaka King puts together, both as a writer and a director. All the performances are freaking fantastic. The soundtrack and everything is amazing for this, but at the same time, it reminds us how we need to change, how we need to grow. One of the things that I kept getting Facebook ads for this movie leading up to the launch for HBO-Max, and one of the critic quotes that had been snipped as an advertisement has stuck with me, and it says, I want to say it was from the Times, but it said something along the lines of, Judas is both timeless and timely. And that, like, coming out of this movie and thinking about the impact of the Black Panther Party and how they're still around today, because there's still a fight that needs to be fought, and there's still conversations that need to be have. Hence why you still keep getting these podcasts from us, because at the end of the day, like, these are conversations we need to have. But yeah, it boils down to, that this, I think the saddest part of this movie, outside of, Fred-Hampton's fate, is the fact that this is both a message that we need to hear now, but it's also, I'm curious to see how people are going to respond to this, not necessarily as film goers, but this movie challenges you in a way to say, okay, this stuff is happening in our streets, this stuff is still taking place, and what happened, back in the 60s and the 70s are still happening today. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, it had me questioning, like, am I doing enough to help in the fight for social justice? Because we see not just Fred-Hampton, but we see all of these people around who are following his lead, but they're each doing their own individual, job of promoting that Black empowerment, of being out in the streets and spreading the message and trying to gather these groups that may not even be a support of the Panthers at first, but these groups who understand that there is a common plight we all have. And it's that, well, capitalism is kicking us in the butt. And, we may have the different skin color, because in the film we see that Fred-Hampton had a rainbow coalition. There's a scene where he goes right to this, I guess, white pride group that's in Chicago, and they're in a meeting, and Fred goes in there and he's talking to the guys. He's saying, hey, you may believe in this, but trust me, we're more the same than different. We both have the same problem. Our communities are in shambles. Your communities are in shambles. And I feel that it's better if we could turn our attention towards that one enemy that has us bickering against each other. Why don't we come together and fight against that enemy? And then you see that Fred-Hampton also brings in a Mexican revolutionary group. And they come together because the Mexican guy, they go to his funeral and talk, hey, my guy was killed by the police in the street and nothing's being done about it. Everybody can agree that, hey, police brutality sucks and it's terrible and it should not happen. And I believe that's why Fred-Hampton was such a threat to the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, was because not only could this guy bring large amounts of black people together, he could bring white people, he could bring Mexican people, he could bring anybody that's in the struggle to fight for revolution, to fight for social justice, to fight for equality. He could bring all those people together because he was such a great orator. And he was a guy that was really in the fight. You could tell that he was in the fight. He says in the movie, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. He was ready to die for this. Even when he knows that he's going to have a kid, he says, hey, when I give my life to revolution, I give my life. And you don't see too many leaders like that anymore. We don't have a Fred-Hampton out here now, and we should have one, or we could probably become maybe our own Fred-Hampton. A guy who can inspire other people around to see that things are not looking good for all of us, and until all of us comes together, until we stop fighting one another, then nothing in this country, nothing of the system will change.
I would love to see a Fred-Hampton archetype rise up in our social media age. I feel like it's so easy to be bold behind a keyboard, but it is a complete and utter thing to step outside of that keyboard and really start to do things. And that's something that I've really been meditating about over the last year as a leader within Victims and Villains, is how do we respond to social injustice? What does our part play? Because I feel like the podcast that we've done over the last couple of years, when it comes to talking about racism, whether we're talking about When They See Us in the Central Park 5, or we're talking about Watchmen and the 1921 Tulsa Massacre, we're talking about James Baldwin, or a lot of Malcolm X, a lot of these other huge historical figures that don't get a lot of notifications and notice. That's great, and we're putting that out there in the world, but I also at the same time think that what does it look like to be doing more, and not only for us as a organization, but also as for me as a person. And the last year has kind of really taught me a lot more in my growth, and kind of taught me a lot. And I think that we're still kind of at this point where we need to have that Fred-Hampton leader in to some degree in a city, or maybe it looks like it in Congress, or maybe it's somewhere out there that's in a nonprofit organization that's just trying to get itself off the ground, or maybe we see a big celebrity like some of the actors that are involved in Judas come out and start to be that voice. But I think a large portion of it has to come with education as well. One of my favorite sequences in here as well, and one of the things that I really liked about learning more about the Black Panthers, was breaking down those misconceptions that I had been taught all these years, and realizing that these guys are genuinely, they're not after just simply wanting to unify black people and fight the system, but they're looking to unite all races and truly create racial equality. And that's just something that I think we don't really see, but see nowadays. I think that we're getting better at it, but it's still, you have those days where it's just not to the degree that it should be. And I also think as well, with breaking misconceptions, you see how passionate Hampton was about really educating the next generation that was rising up, feeding their bodies while also feeding their minds. Some of the best sequences, I think, in this movie come from him teaching young boys and girls about Black history and their heritage. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, I wanted to go to your point about, why we don't see the next Fred Hampton in our society today. And I think it's because, think about it, Fred Hampton wasn't around in the age of social media, and also Fred Hampton's dedication that couldn't be disputed. I mean, the guy was ready and willing to die for the cause that he believed in. And it's kind of hard to find that these days, because what I'm seeing, especially what I saw last year, is that once the tragic death of George Floyd was broadcasted to everybody, we started seeing everybody jump on the bandwagon of BLM and, hey, RIP George Floyd, hey, stop racism. But the thing that you saw is that a few weeks after George Floyd passed away, a lot of the people who were gung-ho about Black Lives Matter, they just stopped posting everything about it. They just went back to their whole regular routine. It's like people, and this is the reason why we don't have, the kind of success that these guys had in the past of getting things done. And I'm not saying that the civil rights movement and the Black Panthers were all successful, because we're still facing the same problems that they were fighting against. But the reason why we're not able to have a unified effort and really put pressure on the system changing is that you're going to find it hard for a lot of people to just be dedicated and pull it together without there being some kind of caveat. Most of these people will post BLM and post a black image photo and just be all about it, all for clout, for likes, for comments, to be a part of a trend. And then once that trend dies down, then they stop posting and they stop being about it. I hate to say this, but I remember last year there was a lot of podcasts that I were following that were inviting a lot of black voices to be on there. And then once the whole George Floyd and social and protest movement died down, then they stopped inviting those black voices onto those same podcasts, and it feels kind of disingenuous. And it's very hard to see who are the true, real fighters, because for one, they're not about the social media image. They're all about fighting, and they don't care about posting about anything about them marching or anything like that. When they're in the fight, they're really in the fight. But I can tell people is that there are little things you can do to not be a Fred-Hampton, but to be somebody who is an advocate of social justice. If you see somebody making hateful comments on a Facebook or Twitter post, go right at them, address it. Because the only way that we can stop this disease from spreading is if we nip it in the bud when we see it. There are so many times where I see that a lot of people will say these little comments that will kind of make you turn your head or squint your eyes a little bit because they sound very problematic, but then you will see people who will reply but not even go at the person making those problematic comments. But now you are starting to see that, you know, celebrities, stars, people who are making problematic comments that do reek of racism, they're starting to get their just due. So I will say they improved on that. But also, if you have a family member out there that is spouting racist views or saying things that you know feel very discriminatory, then call them out on it. Yes, I know you may love your mom, your dad, and your aunt and uncle, but hey, like we can't let that fly now. You know, it's 2021. You know, racism didn't die. It just was waiting. It was waiting in the ground for somebody like the last president we just had to come and stoke the fears of everybody around. And that's the thing. Racism is a byproduct of people's fears. You know, people telling them, hey, like this person is going to come from this other country, they're going to take your job, or this person is going to come over, move into your neighborhood and turn it into a hellhole. You know, things like that make people fear the other. And once they fear the other, then there's no chance for that person to join the other person in that fight against the one common enemy. And the division in this country is what keeps us from having more movements like the Black Panthers or more movements like the Civil Rights Movement. Now, like you said, it's starting to improve a little bit, but until we can get rid of that division, that unrest, and until we can have full accountability and have people who are willing to go and stomp out any problematic stuff that they see online, then this will continue to fester and it will never get fixed.
No, and you brought up so many good points. I'm like racking my brain. It's like my brain has been split like the Red Sea, where I'm like listening to you and I'm like trying to respond in my mind at the same time. But no, I think that, you know, you talk about how we treat racism in social media first off, and it's like we only respond to it when it's trending. And because at the end of the day, like we're all on social media to be heard and to be validated. And I think that's, for me and you, that's a reason why we talked about this with Malcolm and Marie, where we're starting to step back from social media for those very reasons. And we want genuine connections and we want to have genuine conversations. And I think that, you know, it's great that we saw a lot of, you know, BLM stuff that came out last year and that it was such a point of conversation. But it's just like, once that conversation like died, or like fizzled away out of the trending section of Twitter, it just never seemed to come in. And that is really bothersome. And that's the sign of, I think, also kind of why, as you were talking about, we're not seeing a Fred-Hampton archetype or figure in the new age. And, you know, also too with the tokenizing of Black voices and Black creators on podcasts. Like when me and you sat down last year to plan that series of episodes we did, you know, I was like, I want to have Black voices, and because I know as a white man, like I can't speak to the experience of a lot of the stuff that we talked about, and I wanted to have, you know, promote more Black voices, and but I didn't want them just to come on and talk about Black history. Like it's like, okay, when E-Man's a great example, it's like, all right, we want you to come on and talk about Malcolm X, but in a couple weeks we want to have you back and we want to talk about Misery, a Stephen King movie. And, you know, really just meeting and connecting with people as people, because, like you said, like we're all the same. We all share one common enemy. The only thing that makes us different is the way that we look on the outside. And we just need to get over that. And I know that, like, is easier said than done. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think that that's kind of really fears what holds us back. And the way that we look. And I don't know, man. It's interesting to navigate racism in this new age of social media, because you don't know who's genuine and who's not.
Yeah, I mean, did you see last year during when the riots happened, and you saw that there was this girl who came out and posed for a photo pretending like she was putting up a board on a store, and then once the person who took the photo put their phone down, she immediately dropped the board, she dropped the fake drill that she had, and went right to her car and just checked on to see how many likes she was getting. That's the point that we're at right now.
Wow.
As far as the conversation between racism and social media.
Wow. And I mean, again, it's also how you're using your platform. So, like, we're using our platform to talk about film and mental health, but we're also using it as a place to, you know, say, hey, like, you listening to this right now, like, this is a safe environment for you to be accepted regardless of what you believe socially, politically, what color you are, what gender you are or identify with. Like, we just want you to know that you have value and that you have worth. And then you have other people that are just trying to use their platform to see how wasted they can get and what kind of stuff that they can create while drunk. And it's like, man, it's like, how are you using the platform of social media?
It's all about going viral, Josh. I mean, isn't that it's all about creating that new 1 million view TikTok, you know? I mean, that's what it's become. It's you know, that's why I don't even buy into these companies who are talking about Black Lives Matter. It's like, well, how are you treating the black people in your company? Like, when Nike put out its whole Black Lives Matter campaign, it's like, yeah, but are you giving out free shoes to any black patrons who come into your store? Or are you just using the name to just drive further your capitalistic interests? Or like when Amazon came out, it was like Black Lives Matter, but hey, I've been hearing stories about the way that you treat your black workers, and that's not good. Yeah. So everybody's jumping on the trend. It's all about virtue signaling. You know, like, you want to put out there that you believe in this cause, but your actions and the way that you have treated black workers doesn't make it seem like Black Lives Matter to you. I think it's just for you to jump in on the trend and try to get some cash out of it. It's very hard to just find a genuine voice that is all about Black Lives Matter and is not looking for any credit, because you can't be looking for any credit when you're in this business. I mean, MLK was famous, but MLK was famous because of his actions. I don't think he was looking out here to do press ops when he was doing marches in the cities and he was being thrown in jail for fighting for the right for social change. Malcolm X wasn't about looking for any credit or any clout or anything. He was making speeches. He was out in the community. He was doing what needed to be done to spread the message, to spread black empowerment. But what we get now is you get guys like Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton, yes, I'll admit, he's been there, and he's been the guy who's been, you know, at any time there's been a hate crime against a black person, anytime there's been like some racism happening in another country, he's always there in front of the TV cameras talking and speaking about it. But he's not an MLK. He's not a Fred-Hampton. He's just a talk box. That's all he is. He's just a talk box that will get some people to march and then call it a day and move on to the next tragedy that happens. You know, you need somebody who's going to be willing to throw all caution in the wind and go in full strong with the fight. We need like at least thousands, millions of people like that. You know, it can't just be a thing that we do to make ourselves feel good and then forget all about it 2 weeks from now. Like, no, this has to be a continued fight, because as long as if you let your foot off the brakes, racism is going to continue to spread. And it's not just a case of, oh, well, let's wait for all the old people to die. No, this thing is being taught to kids at a young age because no one is ever born a racist. And also, people are on social media. They're looking at this misinformation. They're looking at memes. They're looking at these podcasts. There's white supremacists out here that have podcasts that all they do is just spew hate, not just against black people, but any group of people of color. And they're influencing a lot of these people who may be vulnerable at the point. They may be young. They may be going through some life changes right now, and they need a community to hold on to. And what they end up finding is communities that support white supremacy or support kooky conspiracy theories like QAnon, which has roots in white supremacy. So racism is not just a fight to where you put a 140 letter tweet out and call it a day. No, this is something that you have to dedicate your whole life to. And hey, I don't blame anybody who's not willing to dedicate their life to, because it's hard. I mean, fighting for revolution is not easy. It's tough. And you see what happens to all the great revolutionaries, not just Malcolm and Martin and Fred-Hampton, but guys like Che Guevara, guys like Marcus Garvey, even people who fought in the feminist movement, they were getting terrorized. I mean, the anti-war groups, they were getting terrorized by COINTELPRO at the same time of the Black Panthers. Anytime that there's a movement that is looking to spark social change in America, it's always treated as the number one threat.
Side note, real quick, before I forget this, there's I know me and you have been talking about one of the more underdog movies in Spike Lee's filmography in Bamboozled. There's actually a scene where Al Sharpton is leading a riot of protesters outside the television station. And as soon as you had mentioned that, like, that scene just flashed into my head. But no, we see it in here too with Fred-Hampton as well, where he was really he was such this big threat when it came to revolution and changing the mindset of people around him, and had all of this influence that the FBI had basically said, hey, we have to just get him off the streets. Do whatever you have to get him off the streets. And he ended up actually going to prison for a couple of years, I think. And it was all for a quote-unquote ice cream truck robbery. I don't know. That just... that time doesn't add up.
People out here robbing ice cream trucks.
Yeah, it was like the guy got I think the movie mentions that he got $7 from the ice cream truck, and he got framed for it, which is sad, but it worked. The FBI got what they wanted. However, we've talked for 45 minutes and haven't even mentioned the character of Bill O'Neill. And this movie has now added a bucket list challenge for 2021 to find this Bill O'Neill documentary from PBS, because apparently it does not exist on the internet anymore. HBO-Max, if you're listening to this, drop it on your service. Let us see the real thing. No, he rose to power, and I guess we should also declare that kind of who his character is in the movie and in the narrative of the Black Panther Party and story of Fred Hampton's life. He basically was a car thief that got busted. And when he got busted, he basically made this deal with the FBI that, hey, if you infiltrate the Black Panther Party, we won't sentence you to any time in jail. And he rose when Fred, he rose up in the party's hierarchy when Fred went to prison, and he was head of security for the party.
Yeah, he was the head of security.
Yeah. Yeah, man, his story was real tragic, the way that it ends, and like the first time that like he's telling this story for the only televised interview that he's ever gotten, this PBS special called Eyes of the North, I think. I probably said that wrong, but he committed suicide the very next day, and this interview took place like 15 years after Hampton's death. But yeah, lakeith-stanfield does an incredible job in this movie. I found his performance so captivating, and at the end, when you get to see the clip from the documentary that all of this comes from, the mannerisms that you get to see of the real life O'Neal very briefly, I feel like Stanfield just mastered this performance really, really well. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Oh yeah, Stanfield is great in this character. What I liked is that he's really showing you the eternal fight he's having with himself. The situation that he finds himself in is almost akin to being in jail. I mean, he's entrapped into working with the FBI in order to infiltrate the Black Panthers, because he's caught in the beginning of the film stealing a car, and the FBI is like, hey, stealing a car, that's like this amount of years, and impersonating a federal agent, that's like 5 or 6 years. And so pretty much William O'Neal didn't have a choice. It was either you work for us or we're going to put you in the jail for 6 years. And let me tell you, no person doesn't want to go to jail. And if you find a person that is willing and ready to go to jail, then stay away from that person, because they might be crazy. The way that we treat jail here in America is terrible. It's honestly terrible. Yes, I'm understanding that these people committed crimes and they made mistakes, but aren't we all about second chances in this country? Aren't we all about forgiveness? When a celebrity does something stupid or does something wrong, don't people come to their aid like, hey, they made a mistake, let's give them a second chance? Well, why is that not the same for these prisoners, especially non-violent offenders that are in prison, which make up most of the prison population in America? So Will O'Neal, he had to do what he had to do, and I'm not saying that it's right, because we can go into a whole nother conversation about what he did, which is considered dishonorable. In street terms, it's called snitching or being a rat. I mean, you see any Martin Scorsese film, you see the mob will always take out anybody that infiltrates or tries to go to the police about their criminal activities. And anybody who is considered a snitch is treated like a piranha, still, even in society. I remember growing up that even when you were going to elementary school, if you were known as a tile teller, there would be kids who wouldn't sit with you at the lunch table. Yep. And there would be kids who would pick on you and bully you and call you names if you were even considered a tile teller. So I grew up under that, under those kind of moments. So seeing it in this film, you see that this guy, yes, he's a snitch. Yes, what he did is very horrible and it's terrible, but you have to see that this guy was also trapped as well. He was used as a weapon for white supremacy. The thing that the FBI would do is that when it came to these groups, not just Black Panthers, but the NAACP, the Southern Leadership Conference, or even anti-war groups, when they will always send in people to infiltrate these groups, go undercover, make yourself acquainted with how these groups work. Like, tell us what they plan on doing, what are their messages about. And then once the informant was able to gather enough information, then the FBI would come in and with all kinds of warrants, all kinds of ways to disrupt the groups until they stopped coming together and destroyed them. And that's what William Neal was used for. Jesse Plemons' character in this film is very interesting. You can see that this is a guy who likes to paint himself as, hey, I'm just a guy who's worried about America. Like, hey, I stopped the KKK. But he fails to understand that him equating the Black Panthers to what he did with the KKK is not the same, and is almost treated as, hey, I'm not a racist, but blah, blah, blah. You say something that is kind of racist. And you can see that he even has some trouble in believing it at first, but he eventually falls right into that camaraderie with J. Edgar Hoover and even the Chicago PD in believing that the Black Panthers had to be taken out. And William is just struggling the whole film with this. You can see that this guy, he did make some mistakes. He, who knows what he could have been doing even before, we see him get caught trying to steal a car. But he's a human at the end of the day. And his actions, yeah, he's going to be judged for them forever. But you also have to understand that he was used as a weapon, just as many people have been used in bringing down groups like the Black Panthers and NAACP. Did you even know that when the NAACP, when MLK was doing his marches, the FBI had an informant in that group that reported back to them whatever MLK was doing? Because there's a great documentary that I recommend for you and anybody else to watch. It's called MLK FBI. It was released just early this year in January. I saw a screener for it in last December, and it just blew me away with how deep the FBI was able to know everything about Martin Luther King Jr. They even know about his infidelities. They knew where he would be at every time, and they even tried to make the man commit suicide to himself. It's a very, very interesting documentary. I definitely would recommend it. But yeah, this is a tactic that was used for any group that went against the priorities and the picture-perfect image that the federal government tried to put on its citizens.
Yeah, the 60s and the 70s, and I don't know. I mean, we're just now starting to see and hear stuff like MLK FBI, and by the way, it's been on my list since the beginning of this year. I'm waiting for it to hit the physical media, and gonna do my thing then. But right around this time too, it's funny that you brought up Scorsese and gangster films, because the FBI shortly after the events of the Black Panther Party kind of being disbanded, so to say, also had a rat in the South Jersey crime racket. With we saw it a couple years ago in Johnny Depp's turn as Whitey Bulger in Black Mass, and that's a fascinating piece of history. But I think William, what makes his story so tragic is the fact that I think he starts in the beginning to really gravitate towards this organization simply to avoid his turn in jail, for lack of a better word. And then as the film progresses and he spent more and more time and understands the philosophies and the views and the politics of the Black Panther Party, he really starts to feel and he really starts to believe what they're preaching. There's a great scene at the end where the speech that you specifically talked about earlier, where you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill revolution. The scene where that's taken from, there's a scene, it's a rally scene after Fred gets comes home from prison, and basically Roy, who's Plemons' character in this movie, is there, and him and O'Neill kind of catch this like eye contact, and it kind of almost comes across that like he has like this like really like heartfelt conviction about being not only a rat within the organization, but also the fact that he might even start believing what the organization stands for. And I think to a degree that there's also Roy's character kind of starts to believe it too. There's a sequence where they're all in it's J. Edgar Hoover and then Roy and then Roy's superior. They're all talking, and Hoover asks Roy, what would you do if your daughter, who's an infant, brings home a black man? And you can just instantly tell how uncomfortable that question made him. And I question whether or not, what was happening and what they were learning from the Black Panther Party had any effect on that. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's like J. Edgar Hoover said, the Black Panthers are the greatest threat to the national security of America.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter what they were doing for the community. It didn't matter about the breakfast programs and the education programs that they held for children. It didn't matter about that. The scene where Fred-Hampton is arrested for that hot ice cream truck heist, he's being taken out while they're feeding kids. So the police, they didn't care about what the Black Panthers were doing. They just wanted to get rid of them because they knew that they were fighting against a system that they were profiting off of. The Black Panthers talked about how, many of their friends and many of their family members had been murdered or even beaten by the police. So they were already an enemy of the police. So the Chicago PD and the FBI coming together to work to take them down, that was a dream in heaven for them. And seeing how William, how he takes this, how he takes seeing when, when there's the moment when the cops have a shootout with the Black Panthers in the neighborhood, and how he's like taking this all in and wondering, when does this end? When does this stop? And at the end, I want to talk about this to really kind of sum up my thoughts about William O'Neill, but I want to talk about the end where once Fred-Hampton is assassinated in his own bed while he was asleep, and 99 shots were shot through the house and only one was fired back from any of the Black Panthers. So keep in mind that Jesse Plemons' character goes to William O'Neill and tells him, hey, you have a business now. You have a gas station and you got some money. You got a lot of money in inventory. I would take this if I were you. And Lakeith does this thing where he looks him in the eye, and his eyes are telling so much more than any dialogue he could spit. He's saying like, you think that this is worth a man's life? You think that I did this just to have a come up or have my own gas station? Like, I took away the best chance for the Black community to have a chance at having full social justice in this country. I took away their hero. And even though I was working for you, I believed in their fight. I believed in what they were preaching. These people saw me as like their friend. They saw me as their confidant. And it really shows you how that internal strife within him really broke him apart. And at the end, we see that at the same night that Eyes on the Prize 2, which contained an interview with William O'Neill, debuted on PBS, he committed suicide. He couldn't take it. The guilt, and knowing that everybody in the country is going to know that this is the guy that brought down a young 21-year-old Fred-Hampton. Yeah, he couldn't live with that. And there's a tragedy in that. And for anybody who says like, oh, well, like he's responsible for Fred-Hampton getting killed. Like, yes, I understand that. But don't you know that, I mean, he was just another tool. He was another weapon to be used against a black man, they always tell you that if you want to bring down somebody, you don't use his enemies to bring him down. You use the people he knows best. You use his friends. You use the people he trusts so they don't see it coming. And Fred Hampton was not able to see this coming. Him and Will had a good relationship for the most part until the end, when Will started to kind of like juice the gas for Fred to use like weapons against the police, seeing as how they had burned down his building. But Fred trusted him. He saw him as a guy who was in the same fight as he was. And, he was a guy that was hoping that Will would become maybe like him. Not maybe like him, but maybe a guy who would be a central figure in the Black Panthers in case that he went to jail or he ended up dying. And I just wonder just how, William was able to carry all that for so long. I mean, because it wasn't until like the early 90s that we heard back from him again. But all those years where he had that gas station, where he was spending time with, his family, with his kids, or him being able to breathe and wondering like that he was also the main reason that Fred Hampton was not breathing right now. I mean, that has to destroy anybody.
Absolutely. There's a degree of weight that something like that weighs on your mental health. And, how differently would history have been written had Fred Hampton, lived into be I think he would be like 70 now. How different would social justice be now? And I think that's kind of the tragedy that really lies in wake of, yes, O'Neill committing suicide. It's a tragic thing, but a life is a light. A life is value, and a life lost is sadness regardless. But what in his short period of time that he was able to do stuff with the Black Panther Party, Hampton accomplished a lot. And we got to see a lot of that throughout the course of this film. And I like how, we kind of get to see and understand how Chicago is kind of this like very divided and centralized movements. So for lack of a better word, where you had like parties that were similar to the Black Panther, but they had their like own section. And, we see him constantly going into these territories, and he's basically saying, like, I don't want to be separated, but, like, I want to be united because, a united front is always going to be better in the long run. Like, if we want to see true change, like, we need to have each other's back, and we need to, like, link arms and, fight this fight together. And that's I just imagine, like, what would that look like on a global scale of, Hampton's vision kind of being reached here in 2021.
Yeah. I hope that for people who do go out and watch this, whether it's on the theater, whether it's on HBO-Max, just allow the story to sweep you away. Don't come in with any preconceived notions or any preconceived generalizations you've had from past information. Come into this film and truly understand who Fred Hampton was. And don't let this just be your only resource to that. Like, after this film, study some of the figures that are in this. Go and watch the documentaries that me and Josh have recommended you. Go listen to podcasts on the history of the Black Panthers. Go check out some books from the library. Do your research, and also give this film some love. I'm hoping that this film gets a lot of Oscar love. I know, shameless plug here, but the Seattle Film Critics Society, we actually voted Daniel-Kaluuya as Best Supporting Actor this year for his performance in this film. And whenever Kaluuya and Stanfield get in the film together, it's always good because they were both together also in Get Out. So this will make their second time being in the film together. And also, I wanted to give some shout out to Dominique-Fishback. She impressed me in Project Power last year. The only thing that impressed me about that film, and in this film, she's awesome as Fred-Hampton's girlfriend/wife. You know, there's a scene towards the end of the film where her and Hampton have a conversation, and you know, the thing that I love that how this film was made by a black filmmaker is that it shows these scenes where you have these historical black figures. They show them as a human having these personal moments with either a spouse or with friends and family. I mean, think about, we were speaking about Chadwick Boseman before this podcast. Think about his film 42, the story of Jackie Robinson. In that film, have you seen 42?
Yeah, I saw it last year when they re-released it.
Now let me ask you. In that film, did you see one personal moment where Jackie had a conversation with his wife like Fred Hampton has in this film with his wife?
They're very far and few between. It's not to this degree. It's very brief. It focuses on his struggle specifically in the major league.
Yeah, I the one thing that frustrated me about 42 was that it felt like the movie wasn't really even about Jackie Robinson. There's in the beginning, the opening scene really focuses on Harrison Ford's character, Branch Rickey, and it seems like the film works through him, but we don't really get into any finer details of Jackie Robinson's character outside of what you could read in a normal history book. Yeah. But with this film, I didn't learn just about Fred Hampton because I knew about Fred Hampton. I learned about him at the moments where he wasn't speaking at a mic, the moments where he wasn't out giving an interview, the moments where he wasn't out marching. You get to see him behind closed doors. And, Dominique, her character, her and Fred have a conversation about how she feels she might be a bad mother. And Fred's like, no, you're not going to be a bad mother. You're good. And that's something I've never seen before in a film like this, because often when we see a woman who's pregnant, we just talk about how happy it is that there's a new baby on the way, but we don't get these moments where even mothers sometimes can feel like, hey, I'm worried. I don't know what I'm going to do. Am I going to be a good parent? am I even fit to be a parent? And it's these personal moments right here, that is what made the film for me. Not the obvious, big moments of Hampton's life, but these personal moments right here really touch me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up Fishback, because she has one of my favorite scenes. You talk about how Stanfield is able to convey a plethora of emotions without opening his lips. And I think there's another scene with Fishback in here where, again, it's at that rally towards the end of the movie where she is hearing Fred talk about dying and his, willingness to die for this cause, and she just starts crying because she's about to have his child, and she's getting ready to, awake the possibility that she could be doing it alone. And I love the intimate scenes and the vulnerability that her character is able to have with Hampton throughout the course of this. I love too the not just with her character, but I love the genuine chemistry that Kaluuya has with other actors in the course of this film, where he's not out marching, but they're in the car or they're just hanging out, just enjoying one another's company. I think those are some of the, richest moments in the movie. And I'm so thankful for those films, because that's another thing that's one of the first things I really fell in love with upon finishing this film, was how much of humanizing they brought to Hampton. Because you're right, when you watch movies about these civil rights activists, and leaders and heroes were just kind of seeing what everyone else saw. Like everything we're learning, like I can go on Google and read that on Wikipedia, or I can go and watch it in a documentary or learn it in a classroom setting. I want to know who they were as people. And that's so many tender moments, and the bedroom scene in particular that you're referring to is just a prime example of that. And you really got to see just how much he really cared for this woman, for one, and for the family that they were raising together, and just the amount of love that was genuine with him.
Yes, and you really get to see how much of a hero this guy was. There's a scene towards the end where before, the apartment is shot up, where the Black Panthers in some of the Chicago, Crown Heights people are talking with Fred. They're telling him, "Hey, we got you enough money where you can either go to Angola or you can go to Cuba." And Fred is like, "Y'all guys were talking about me going to Angola and going to these places when I'm trying to open up a medical center." This guy was not worried about being out on the run and getting away for his own benefit. He wanted to stay where he was at. He couldn't leave the fight, and he was going to do what he could to improve his community. He wanted to name the medical center after his friend that died. Yeah. He said, "I don't want people to think of my friend as just this guy that is in the newspaper who killed cops. I want people to understand healing when you see the name Alex Winters." Because in the film, his friend Alex Winters, who was, very mad and had enough when he found out that his friend was shot and killed, he was shot by the cops, that his friend had ended up shooting a police officer. And then his friend ended up getting checked out of the hospital and killed by the Chicago PD. And so he goes out and he kills a couple of cops. And it's a very tough scene to watch, because you realize that he's not making out of this alive. And also he's killing cops too, and I'm not an advocate for that at all, but you can see where from his justification why he did it. But you see that even in the time of stress and strife that Fred found himself in, he was still thinking about doing things that was for the benefit of the people. And he was a selfless leader, and that's the best kind of leader to have, a leader that is not about what things can be done for him. No, he's talking about what can be done for the people.
Yeah, he's always community focused, and that was one of the more endearing scenes to watch, because he knew that his fate was kind of sealed. Like, he was either going away from the country and he was going to be this amazing husband and father, or he was going to, stand his ground and was going back to prison, and knew that this movement that he had spent so much energy and time and of his life pouring into uniting all of the people of Chicago that were, shared that ideology, that he was going to continue providing for them. And again, it's just such a commendable thing that he's able to do. And it comes back to a previous point that it breaks my heart that we don't ever talk about Fred Hampton, because Fred Hampton was able to accomplish so much in such a short period of time. I don't know to what degree he got involved with the Black Panthers, at what age, but he maybe it's 18 to 21. It's a 3-year window. It's not a whole lot of time, but yet he was able to accomplish so much. And yet we talk about him so little, because we deem him to be a threat against what we consider to be normal. And he was a revolutionary. His story is still affecting us and still having an impact on us here in 2021, even after he died long ago. And this movie, again, I said it at the beginning of the podcast, this movie is the first important film that we've gotten this year in a dramatized format. So if you guys have made it this far and we've spoiled the crap out of this movie for you, please go check out this movie. I promise you all the performances are well worth it, but it's a important stamp of history that is caught on cinema.
It's a grandiose spectacle of filmmaking. That's the biggest compliment I can give it. It's one of the best films. It's probably going to still be at the top of my list by the end of this year. I mean, there's so much passion, a lot of skill, so much heart is put into this film. And you can tell from the actors to the music to the cinematography to the direction to the costume design to the production design. Everything is operating at 100. So definitely go watch it, and no excuses. Hey, if you don't have that HBO-Max hookup, try to get a friend. Try to get that friend to give you the password, give you the account info so you can watch this film.
Yeah, so you guys, once again, we'll provide links in the show notes for you guys. Please consider checking out Black Against Empire, The History and Politics of the Black Panther Party by Joshua Bloom, Black-Power-Mixtape, Vanguard of the Revolution, and the Murder of Fred-Hampton after you guys have seen this movie, because, again, this movie really does a good job at encapsulating the story of Fred-Hampton, but it only scratches the surface of so much of what was happening at the time of the Black Panther Party. But I think that's going to do it for us on this episode of Victims and Villains. But Kales, where can people find you online, and where can they find your other podcast?
You can find me. I'm taking a little bit of a Twitter hiatus, so I'm not going to really recommend to follow me right at this point. But hey, follow me on Facebook. Spell my name. My name's Cales, last name Davis. You can find me on letterboxd.com and Instagram under Black Nerd Magic. And if you want to see any reviews I've done, check out Victims and Villains, our site. I've done some reviews in the past, and also check out our best friends over at feelingfilm.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really, really love you guys. And I've loved, spoiler alert, I don't know what this says about me. I don't know if it's because I'm closer with you than I am with Patch, but I like you and Aaron's conversations. I don't know what that says about me. Anyways, you guys can follow me on Letterboxd as well. I am under Captain Nostalgia. All of my film journey I've been putting up on the Victims and Villains Instagram page. You guys can also follow us at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd as well. Victimsandvillains.net will get you guys access to all of our social media, past episodes, movie reviews like Kales said, and most importantly, our suicide prevention resource library. We'll see you guys soon.